Hey gang, Jane here with another crochet technique tutorial. This is another one in our seam series because one of the biggest questions I get is how do you join your squares? So in this series, we're exploring different ways to join our crocheted squares together. In today's tutorial, we'll be using a simple slip stitch join, working from the right side to join our two squares together. This is another easy method that gives a nice finish and there's no sewing involved. It's all done with crochet. It gives a slight texture to the front of your seam, but blends in nicely for a finished and polished overall look. This one gives a nice smooth finish on your wrong side, and thus it's great for blankets, home decor, and sweaters. This square was worked in worsted weight yarn with a 5mm hook, and I'll be using the same yarn for the seam, but I'm going to go up to a 6mm hook as I find it helps me work a little looser so the seam's not too tight. If you're already a loose crocheter, you may want to use the same hook that you use for the square. There's no hard and fast rule here, so just experiment with what works for you. So now with this slip stitch seam, we want to work from the right side. So we take our two squares and we want these two edges lined up. And then we'll put our wrong sides together so that our right sides are facing out. And I'm going to join the two squares along this edge. So I'm going to take my hook and I have my slip knot on there already. That's how I like to start these, with the slip knot on the hook already. And because we're doing slip stitches and we're only working through the back loops of each of these, I don't want to go through the entire chain 2 space or it will make it a little awkward and lumpy there. So what I want to do is go through the back loop only of one of the chains. So the second chain that corresponds to that same side, you're going to go through the back loop only, and then on the one behind it, you're going to go through the corresponding back loop only of that square as well. I'm referring to this second loop as a back loop as if you're looking at the squares from the right side. However, because the back square has its wrong side facing you, it looks like a front loop. So just know it's the same corresponding loop on each of the squares. I'm going to probably get repetitive, but I'm going to explain this as I go along, where the back loop is and why it's the back loop. So now that I have my hook in place, you're going to wrap the yarn around, pull through those two back loops only, and through the loop on the hook, because it's a slip stitch seam. Then you're going to go into the next back loop only, and on the back part, it's the loop that's closest to you, because it's going to be a back loop if the right side was facing you. So it's really the two center loops that you're looking at. Yarn over, pull through, and pull through the loop on the hook. So don't do this too tightly. You don't want it to pucker. You want it to lie nice and even and look just like the stitches that are already there. Now let's zoom in for a closer look. So you can see here, I go through the back loop and then the corresponding back loop from the square behind it. Wrap the yarn around, pull it through those two loops, and then through the loop on the hook. So again, you're going through the back loop of each of the squares, which looks like a front loop because your wrong side's facing you, but it's considered a back loop because the right side's out here. And then you pull it just through those two loops and then the loop on the hook. And you get yourself a nice slip stitch seam. So keep on working just like that until you get to the opposite corner. And when you get to the opposite corner, again, you don't want to go into the whole chain 2 space. You just want to go into the loop at the top, back loop for this one, back loop for the other, but the loop that's closest to you. Wrap it around and pull through all, and that's the end of your seam on that side. Now go ahead and cut your yarn around 4 inches and pull it through. And then let's take a look at our seam on the right side. And you can see here how it's actually, I think it's pretty cool when you use a different color because you can see a different pattern show up here. But it can create a nice smooth seam. If you block that out, it just falls right into place. And on the wrong side, it does the same thing, creates kind of a nice smooth seam on the wrong side. So this one works really nice for blankets or garments. It does create a touch of a ridge there, but nothing to really make you stand out. It doesn't really create a huge ridge on it. And here I have 4 squares joined together using the main color of these squares, so the seam blends in with the squares. I joined 2 squares together to create a strip, and then created a second strip, and then I joined the strips together, working all the way across these strips. And I also picked up a stitch where the seam is because it's about the width of one stitch, so you're adding a stitch in for the seam. You can see that it creates a nice framework around my squares. So there you have one version of the slip stitch crocheted seam. If you're looking for more info on the square that I used in this video, then I'll drop the info for that in the description below. I'll also leave the links to some other seam methods there as well. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of these tutorials. Thanks so much for crocheting with me, and I'll see you next time.